I don't know about you, but that looked like money.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. For a while, I've been talking about there being a lot of value with vintage football cards compared to vintage baseball cards. When I was at the Orlando Card Show a couple weeks ago, I was talking to a dealer friend of mine who kind of mentioned the same thing that, you know, he wished he had more vintage football cards in his collection because he sees a lot of value there. And after that, I talked to a couple more contacts of mine in the hobby, and they kind of echoed the same thing that, vintage football is kind of where it's at in terms of some value if that's what you're looking for. So, what I'm guilty of is I'm saying this, but I haven't really done a real big data dive into proving that that's the case. So I don't know where this video is going to take us. I did a data dive on the 70s, 60s, and 50s. I've got some data to show for each decade, what it tells us. I don't know, but it's kind of a fun little dive into some numbers and comparing the two sports in three different decades. So I'm doing the 70s, the 60s, and the 50s. I know some people consider the 80s vintage. That's fine. I personally don't. I'm more of a pre-80s guy, but I think all this will make sense regardless. So, without wasting any more of your time, let's dive into this. We're going to look at the 70s first. And what I did, the criteria was, is I took the top 10 cards from each decade, or 10 of the top cards from each decade. The players have to be Hall of Famers. These are all rookie cards. And I tried to spread it out a little bit. I didn't want to have, 5 or 6 cards from the same set. So as we go on through this, you're going to notice that some guys are left out. It's no disrespect. It's just kind of how I tried to spread out to kind of capture the entire decade. So as you can see here, for baseball, we've got the 71 Bert Blyleven, the 72 Carlton Fisk, the 73 Mike Schmidt, the 74 Dave Winfield, the 75 George Brett and Robin Yount and Gary Carter, the 76 Eckersley, the 78 Topps Eddie Murray, and lastly the 79 Topps Ozzie Smith. Next to that column, I have the total PSA population for those cards. And in parentheses is the total pop of the collector's grade for each of those cards. And then the column next to that in green is the roughly the price you can expect to pay for a copy of that card in a PSA collector's grade. In this case, a PSA 7. Next to that, you'll see the football players that I chose. The 71 Topps, Terry Bradshaw and Joe Green, the 72 Staubach, the 73 Stabler and Franco Harris, the 75 Swan, the 76 Walter Payton, the 77 Steve Largent, the 78 Tony Dorsett, and the 79 Earl Campbell. I guess, one thing I noticed right away is that, when I added up the total pop for the baseball and football, the total pop for baseball is about 108,000 total cards, and 24,000 of those were in the PSA 7 grade, which is about 22% of the population. Going over to football, it was a 58,000 roughly pop count. About 10,600 were collector's grade, which is about 18%. So right off the bat, I see that, baseball is just about twice as much as football in terms of population, which that's not surprising. That's something that I've talked about for a while now, and other people have mentioned too, that there's a lot more baseball than there is football. There's no question about that. The question really becomes, is there value to be had with football? And looking at this data, um, I don't know if the 1970s have much value when it comes to vintage football. I really don't see it. When you look at if you look at the numbers in red, the price at the bottom for baseball, $1,690. That's how much it would cost you to buy each of those 10 cards in a PSA 7 grade. When you go over to football, you'll see the cost is about $3,000, $3,045 to be exact, which is a little less than double that of baseball. And its total population is a little more than half of baseball. So that kind of evens out, right? Like, yeah, baseball, there's twice as much of it, but the price to get those 10 cards is half of what it would cost to get the comparable 10 football rookies. This is not an exact science. I'm not pretending it is. There's cards in both baseball and football that are either condition sensitive, have centering issues, which carry a premium, like the 78 Murray and the 79 Ozzie Smith. So it's not really a perfect science, but it does give us kind of a glimpse as to, how much value is there really? And this one kind of surprised me because maybe it's because the crop of rookies in baseball in the 70s isn't quite as strong as football. Bradshaw, Staubach, and Peyton are three of the greatest of all time. And no disrespect to those on the baseball side, none of those players are really. Maybe Mike Schmidt could be the greatest third baseman of all time. That's arguable. But they don't have the same clout as a Bradshaw, Staubach, Walter Payton type player. Interestingly enough, a lot of the value that I see really comes from the lesser known Hall of Famers. I think like a Ken Stabler or a Franco Harris, there is some value there. As you can see, there's only 391 Ken Stablers in a PSA 7 that you could buy. If you look at somebody comparable from baseball, let's say, I don't know, a Robin Yount, there are over 3,500 copies of that card. And it's the same price. So that's where I think the value is. I don't think the value is in the Bradshaw or the Staubach or the Peyton. I don't really see it there. Now, there are reasons why the Bradshaw, Staubach, Mean Joe Green is another one, and the Walter Payton are expensive. For the Bradshaw, Green, and Staubach, those sets are very condition sensitive, especially the 71 tops. And then the Walter Payton, he's the best rookie card of the decade. There's no question about that. And it's Walter Payton, who some consider the greatest running back of all time. So even still, if Walter Payton's the best rookie of the decade, and let's say the Schmidt is the best baseball rookie of the decade, it's funny. There are less Schmidts than Paytons, and Payton is more. So the value isn't really there as much in the 70s. At least you can't see it as much in the 70s. But that's about to change because we're going to switch gears and go to the 60s. It's the same chart, same breakdown, all that. Hopefully it makes sense. Again, this is not a perfect science. Just some numbers to kind of stare at. It's the engineer in me. I'm kind of a numbers nerd, so that's kind of what I do. And what I like to stare at. So that being said, okay, cool. So now we're going to look at the 60s, and right away, you should be able to see when you look at the numbers in red how much more population of baseball there is to football. It's about 5-1. But let's run through the cards real quick that I chose. Again, no disrespect to some players out there. It's just I had to spread it out as best as I could. So we had the 60 tops, Yaz and McCovey, the 62 Lou Brock, the 63 Pete Rose, the 65 Carlton, the 67 Seaver and Carew, the 68 Bench and Ryan, and the 69 Reggie. For football, the 60s are pretty light for star rookies in terms of hobby value. But we've got the 61 Fleer Maynard, the 62 Tarkenton and Ditka, the 63 Fleer Allworth and Dawson, the 65 Topps Namath, which is the biggest card of the decade, the 66 Philadelphia Butkus and Sayers, the 68 Greasy, and the 69 Zonka. So right away, you can see both decades have a monster card when it comes to a card graded as collector's grade, in this case a PSA 6. Baseball has the 63 Pete Rose at about $2,500, and then football has the 65 Namath at about $5,500. The crazy thing is, you know, the Namath is probably the most iconic post-war football card that there is. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think the 65 Namath is the 52 Mantle of vintage football. When you take that into consideration, look at the population of the Joe Namath card. There's a total pop of 2149. And if you want a collector's grade PSA 6, there's only 346 of those to choose from. Go over to the Pete Rose, there are 3 times as many roses, about 3.5 times as many in collector's grade, and it's about half the cost. So yes, it's less because there's more, but it's not an equal ratio. So is the Rose a little overpriced? Is the Namath underpriced? You know, that's a question for another episode maybe. But as you can see, in the 60s, we start to get into really, really low population counts for vintage football. And this is where I think the value starts to kick in, is the 60s. If you want a 61 Fleer Don Maynard, Don Maynard's one of the greatest wide receivers of all time, arguably the greatest wide receiver of his era. It's him or Barry or Allworth. It's probably Allworth, but Maynard's in the discussion. If you want a collector's grade Maynard, there's 100 of them. That's it. There's a total pop of 633. Just 633. And that's not even the lowest pop count of the decade that we're looking at. So it's crazy how little of football there is in the 60s. You switch back over to the baseball side, you know, the lowest pop we have is the 67 Rod Carew, and that's still over 4,000. There's not a card in football that's even close to a total pop of 4,000 on this list. The highest pop card is a 69 Zonka at a little over 3,000 cards. So now we're starting to see how much more supply of baseball in the 60s there is as compared to football. It's, again, look at the numbers in red. There's almost 90,000 total pop of those 10 cards that I listed in baseball. And there's a little over 18,000 football. So it's 5-1 basically, pretty close to it. The percentage of collector's grade to total pop is about the same, 17% to 18%. Here's where it gets interesting. If you want all the baseball cards that I listed in a PSA 6, you're going to spend about $8,200. For football, it's going to cost about $9,000. However, more than half of that is taken up by one card, and that's the Namath. And getting a Namath in a PSA 6, yeah, that's gonna cost you some money, over $5,000. You take that $5,000 out, that $5,500. Now you're looking at only $3,500 to get the other nine. If you take the big card out of baseball, which is the Pete Rose, you're still looking at $5,700 to get the other nine. So yeah, a lot of the 60s football total price that I show there of $9,045, more than half of it's taken up by the Namath card, and rightfully so. That is it's like getting a 52 mantle. It really is. And again, the population's really low. And look at the population of some of the other ones. The Tarkenton, 1900. Ditka 1300. This is considered high for football. Honestly, you start pushing 2,000 copies. In baseball, that would be considered low. I mean, the Tom Seaver and the Rod Carew from 67 Tops are considered short prints, and there are over 4,000 of those. 63 Fleer football, really tough set, iconic set. 699 Len Dawsons and 625 Lance Alworths. That's total. If you want a collector's grade, a little over 100 of them. Again, we'll go down the list. Namath, there's only 2149. The Buckus, less than 2,000. I misspoke earlier. I said the Zonka was the highest pop of the list. It's not. It's the Gale Sayers. Still under 4,000 though. And only 656 of those are collector's grade. The 68 Greasy, Hall of Fame QB, legendary Miami Dolphin. Only just shy of 2,100 copies graded by PSA. So again, we really start to see the delta between baseball and football in the 60s. And you see it in the price too. Just look at, let's pick one out let's look at some similar players. Let's say, we'll do Steve Carlton and Len Dawson. Carlton, one of the best lefties of all time. There's almost 8,000 copies of his rookie card. Over 1,300 copies in a PSA 6. And that's going to run you $250. Fair price. Len Dawson, 699 copies total. 106 copies in a PSA 6. So basically 13-to-1 ratio between the Carlton and the Dawson. And the Dawson's going to run you about 3 times more. So there's some value there or something. It all comes down, with everything. It's supply and demand, right? That's economics 101. The demand for football isn't there, and not sure if it ever will be, but there's just something that's off to me. And I don't know what it is. I'm not going to pretend to know what it is, other than I'm enjoying the discount as a vintage football card guy. Let's look at another one from the 60s. Let's look at the highest pop Gale Sayers. It's 3,748 copies, and a PSA 6 will run you $375. Let's look at a 60. Let's look at the 67 Carew. They're around the same year. The Carew's a short print, but the pop is close. His PSA 6 will run you $600. A PSA 6 Gale Sayers will run you $375. Yet there are less Gale Sayers available than there are Rod Carews, about 150 or so less. And the pop is about 500 less for the Gale Sayers. So depending on how you look at this stuff, you can take this data for what it's worth. Again, I'm not trying to preach anything here. I'm just showing numbers and stuff like that. Just food for thought, I guess. But there may be something there. You know, it's where football is really lagging behind. All right, here we are with the 50s. Great decade of cards. By far my favorite. Baseball too. I love the 50s. Everything 50s for me. So baseball is going to be skewed in terms of the value shown in the red at the bottom. I mean, you got two of the most iconic cards in sport printed in the same set. That's the 51 Bowman, Mantle, and Mays. I didn't include the 52 tops because I consider the Bowmans the rookies of those two players. But the 52 tops, Mantle and Mays, would really, really skew this quite a bit. But I try to keep everything kind of the same. So yeah, the 51 Bowman, Mantle, Mays, and Ford. And then we have a 52 Eddie Matthews. I understand that's a short print. You know, impossible to find. Only 104 of those in a PSA 5 and under 1,000 graded by PSA. Then we got the 53 Satchel Paige, the 54 Hank Aaron. My apologies to Ernie Banks and to Al Kaline, but couldn't include you because then I would have had to wipe out Clemente, Koufax, Brooks Robinson, or Bob Gibson. And in order to spread everything out throughout the decade, I couldn't do that. So those are the 10 on the baseball side. On the football side, it's kind of the same. We got, on baseball, we've got 3 from 51 Bowman. Football, we've got 3 from the 50 Bowman set. And that's the Otto Graham, the Y.A. Tittle, and the Marion Motley. We've got the 51 Bowman, Tom Landry, and Norm Van Brocklin. The 54 George Blanda. The 55 tops All-American Don Hudson. The 57 tops Unitas and Starr. And then the 58 Jim Brown. Both lists are just loaded with just awesome pieces of cardboard. These are all so great. But notice one thing. Look at the pop reports between baseball and football, between all these cards. The 51 Bowman Mantle, it's a $28,000 card in a PSA 5, and that depends on, I know, centering and eye appeal, all that stuff. But 28 grand is kind of what I was able to find as a happy place for a price. There's still almost 2,800 copies of that out there. Again, we don't know how many were resubbed and all that jazz either, so take that number for what it's worth. All these pop report numbers for what they're worth. But there's 294 of those graded a PSA 5. Crazy. It's crazy to me. Go over to the 50 Otto Graham. There's only 1,031 of those graded, and only 138 in a 5. And we go down the list, it's the same thing until you get to the Unitas and the Jim Brown, really. Those are the two high pop cards of the decade. And neither one of them are 6,000 or more. The Jim Brown's the most at 57.55. To me, what's funny is that Jim Brown and the Bob Gibson are very similar. Both suffer from centering issues. Both suffer from registration issues. And their populations are kind of close. It's kind of funny. The Jim Brown does go for more money. Jim Brown is considered the greatest player of all time by many. And Bob Gibson, I love his career, loved him as a pitcher, but he's probably not the greatest pitcher of all time, right? But those cards are very similar, very, very similar in terms of, you know, the condition issues that both suffer from are pretty much the same. It's crazy. Um, and then the 50/70 Unitas is a double print, hence the population of almost 4,600. But that's still low. I mean, Johnny Unitas was a gunslinger QB of the 50s and 60s. Sandy Koufax was the gunslinging pitcher of the 50s and 60s. And look at how many more Koufax there are out there. More than twice as many in a PSA 5. Yet you can get the Unitas. You can buy 3 Johnny Unitas rookie cards in a PSA 5 and still not be able to buy a Koufax. When I talk this stuff out, that's when I get kind of fired up and nerdy. Like, that's crazy. Let's compare the Clemente to the Don Hudson. Don Hudson, that's a 55 tops All-American. It's a short print. There are only 1,080 total graded. If you want a collector's grade 5, there's not even 170 of those that have been graded. Look at the Clemente, 7281 with 959 graded a 5. And that's going to cost you about 4 racks, $4,000. A Don Hudson's going to cost you $300. And Don Hudson was the first great wide receiver in pro football history. Unquestionable. He is the first great wide receiver in football history. He's got a legend attached to him. Not saying that Clemente doesn't, because he certainly does, but the price difference is just astounding to me. All these are. Eddie Matthews, it's a 52 tops. It's a high number. I get that. That one's really tough to get. Really tough. But the population differences are nuts. I mean, Jim Brown, let's say Jim Brown and Hank Aaron. There's a PSA 5 Hank Aaron's going to cost you $5,000. A PSA 5 Jim Brown, $1,800. And there are more Hank Aaron's to choose from. Satchel Paige, who can we compare him to? I mean, he's got more than anybody on the list outside of Jim Brown. And he'll cost you the same amount as a Jim Brown. That's fair. It's a 53 Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige is a legend. 53 tops is an iconic set. That one I get. I understand that. But it's also, I don't know. It's not really a rookie card, right? So, Jeremy, why'd you put him on the list? It's supposed to be rookie cards. Yeah, that's on me. My bad. So, yeah. Sorry for the... I can't get over, looking at the pop reports all at once. There's not a lot of 50s and 60s football out there. There's just not a lot of it. I think the value for vintage football lies in anything before the 70s. I think that's where the value is. I don't think there's a whole ton of value in the 70s, having, looked at that data. But the 60s and definitely the 50s. The 50s is where it's at, looking at these numbers. I'm trying to find a comp to the Eddie Matthews in the 50s. They're really, the Bart Starr is considered a short print. It really isn't, because the Unitas was double printed. But, a PSA 5 Bart Starr is $1,000. PSA 5 Eddie Matthews is 10 grand. Like, crazy. I mean, I get it. 52 Tops baseball, that's the set. And definitely for post-war. But 57 Tops football is considered by many the set for post-war football too. Who have we not talked about yet? The Brooks Robinson, 57 Brooks Robinson. He's very comparable to Johnny Unitas in terms of pop and price. That one kind of lines up. But as much as I love Brooks Robinson, I'm an Oriole fan, as you can see on the wall behind me. Greatest third baseman of all time. Not quite the status that Johnny U has. Maybe in the city of Baltimore he does. You know, he's an icon in the city. But as a player and in terms of hobby relevance, I don't think he holds a candle to Unitas. That's just my opinion. And again, no disrespect to Brooks. He's the best. But the fact that you can get that Unitas for less than the Brooks Robinson is kind of surprising. The Koufax talked about, the Aaron, the Page, Whitey Ford. We'll compare him to Y.A. Tittle, I guess. Or any of those guys from 50 Bowman. There's 2,000 copies of Whitey Ford. There's 200 PSA 5s. PSA 5 runs you $2 grand. Wow. Wow. And I can get a PSA 5 YA Tittle for $500. I can get the Tittle, the Graham, the Motley for less than the price of the Whitey Ford. Wow. So yeah, I mean, when you put it in context like that, that's another thing to kind of think about. Like, damn. And Whitey Ford, you know, huge fan of his too. Nothing against him, but I think I'd rather have the Graham, Tittle, and Motley than a PSA 5 Whitey Ford. I've actually got a Whitey Ford in a 3.5 that's absolutely beautiful. So I'm a little biased there probably. But yeah, again, I don't know what I'm trying to accomplish with this video. For a while, I've just wanted to throw some numbers and crap on a wall and, you know, see what we find, you know. Well, I guess I didn't talk about the price in red on the bottom. So 66 grand, you can have all 10 of those baseball cards listed. For about $6,500, you can have all 10 of the football. So 10x, right? With a caveat that, you know, the Mantle and the Mays and the Matthews to some extent are in a different stratosphere. But yeah, that's a 10x price difference. Absolutely crazy. Kind of fun to look at, right? Listen. I love vintage baseball. I collect vintage baseball. I'm not knocking vintage baseball at all. I think it's great. Vintage football will never catch it. I'm not saying it ever will. All I'm saying is that there may be some value to be had and realized pre-1970. I don't think the 70s, you know, after looking at this info, there's not a whole lot of it there to squeeze. But the 50s and 60s, but definitely the 50s have it. So food for thought, I guess. Sorry for the long-winded video. It's kind of how I get when I start looking at numbers and stuff like that. I tend to nerd out, but hopefully you found this a little bit interesting. Probably not. I probably bored you to sleep and you haven't finished the video, in which case I apologize. Hopefully you had a good nap. If you stuck through it this long, let me know what you think. You know, I know it's not really apples to apples, you know, vintage baseball the biggest thing going, right, in terms of sports cards, vintage sports cards. Nothing's gonna compete with it. Vintage football, there's some room for growth there, right? 50s, 60s, anything pre 70. What do you think? I think there is. I think there's, especially the 50s. I keep looking at this list. You see me looking away. I'm blown away at, no, hell, the Jim Brown's underpriced, like way underpriced, I think. For as important as he was and iconic as he was, that's a pretty underpriced card there, especially one that's as condition sensitive as it is. But anyway, that's a topic for another video probably. Anyway, if you stuck around for this long, I really do appreciate it. I try to do these data dives every now and then, and I wanted to do this one for a long time. I'm not really great with splash and fancy graphics and stuff up there, so I apologize for that. You just have to listen to me ramble and stare at a screen, but I appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around this long, and we'll catch you on the next video. See ya.